Welcome to Slayer the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, I have a special guest with me, Tony Dio. We are going to be discussing the movie documentary, The Decline of Western Civilization, Part 2, The Metal Years. This is a documentary that came out in 1988, and it interviews and talks with a lot of people around the LA Sunset Strip, as well as having some interviews with famous artists, right? Tony there has the original VHS version of it, which has Nadir DePriest on the cover, whereas the more common version has Dave Mustaine on the cover there. And right, Tony even has the soundtrack to it. So what is it, the 30th anniversary or something? 35th anniversary of it. I saw Tony did a post on it, and this is well, I'll talk about my experiences with this documentary in a little bit, but if you haven't seen it, you can watch the whole thing on YouTube free, with ads and stuff like that, and it's pretty easy to find it, so you can watch it. But if I highly recommend people check it out, because it's a real kind of on the streets scene of the LA Strip circa 1987, 1988. So Tony, thanks for joining me here again at the Lair. What's your memories of this movie, seeing it for the first time? Maybe how did you come across the movie? Just what's your memories of this movie?
Well, like you said, you can watch if you want to watch it. It is on YouTube. We watched it. My girlfriend had never seen it after I made that post a couple of days ago. She'd never seen it.
Oh,
so
really?
We watched it on. Yeah, we found it on Tubi. Actually, it was on Tubi, and watched it. And but yeah, it's something else. It's definitely a film for the time period, 1980, which they said it was filmed between, I think, 86 and early 88, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And but I remember, I was reading all the magazines like Hit Parader and Circus and so forth at that time. And I remember them talking about it coming out, and I would see an ad for it or whatever in one of the mags. And I just remember being in a record store one day and coming across the soundtrack and flipping it over and seeing all the different bands that's on it, because the soundtrack's got Alice Cooper with Guns N' Roses doing Under My Wheels, an Alice Cooper classic. It's got Faster Pussycat, Motorhead. A lot of these songs were different versions too. Like the Faster Pussycat's version is Bathroom Wall is a live version. Motorhead's got a song called Cradle to the Grave that was only in the movie at that time. Armored Saints on it. Lizzie Borden doing Born to Be Wild. Megadeth's on it. Queensryche's got a song in here. Metal Church, Rigor Mortis, Seduce. Some of these bands weren't even featured in the movie. Like, I don't remember seeing Metal Church or Queensryche, but you hear a piece of those songs like in the movie somewhere. But yeah, it's definitely American heavy metal at that time, for that scene. I mean, really, they do go into the thrash world by interviewing Dave Mustaine and the guys from Megadeth at that period, and that was during when they were doing So Far So Good So What, their third album. But the rest of it's pretty much all the glam stuff that you were seeing at that period, and there's no talk about the new wave of British metal or anything that was happening in Europe at that time. You've got Lemmy in it, of course, Motorhead, but he was living in LA at that time.
Yeah, he was pretty much a fixture of the Sunset Strip at that point.
One of my favorite, some of the quotes from the movie, just legendary. They asked Lemmy, they said, "What do you think of all the pretty rock stars?" He goes, "Oh, you talk about more power to them if they're pretty. I wish I was." And but some of the stuff in there is just legendary scenes, and so Penelope Spheris, I think is her name, and she directed it, and she had already done The Decline of Civilization, Western Civilization Part 1, which was the punk scene in the early 80s, and then there is a Part 3, which is about a lot of the crust punk stuff that was in the early 90s, which I've never seen. But she definitely set up some of these bands. There's actually I ran across a website that kind of goes in depth and tells a little bit I think I was just like looking up Where Are They Now from the movie,
I
and
did
it
the
kind of
same
goes
thing
in, and
today.
it,
Yeah.
and it and it and it you know does some interviews with some of the stars that are in it, some of the performers, and the legendary pool scene with Chris Holmes, for instance, that's pretty much set up. It wasn't even his pool. His mom's there and he's hanging out, and Chris has said in interviews, yeah, it was vodka. And in other stories I've heard, oh, it's just water because he's poured it in his face and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever got any alcohol in your eye; it pretty much burns. And he says it's real, but from what I understand, he was pretty much drunk as crap when he got there. He was pretty much lit. And but then you've got like Paul Stanley being interviewed, and he's laying in a bed with a bunch of beautiful women, and
Yeah.
Gene Simmons is in a lingerie shop just hanging
Yeah.
out, like he's going to be hanging out in a lingerie shop. Um, but those were kind of the legendary, the comical side of it with the interviews and stuff. But everybody, they got Aerosmith, you got Joe Perry and Steven Tyler, and they'd only been 11 months sober at that
Yeah.
time, and that's around the like right before Permanent Vacation, I guess, came out, or right at that
Yeah.
time. And look how big they got after that. I mean, they were already superstars, but then they got even bigger. But then you've got these bands in there that they interview that you go, whatever happened to these guys? I mean, Lizzie Borden, he's still going. He's still got his shows and stuff. His version of Born to Be Wild in there is great as well. I mean, the way they do it with the dual guitars. I don't know if you noticed, but one of the guitar players in Lizzie's band is Joe Holmes.
Is it? I
Who
was
was
wondering
from
that when I was watching it today,
That's
because I
Joe
know
Holmes.
Joe
So
was in the band briefly.
I think he's got kind of sandy blonde hair, and the
Yeah.
other guy's Gene. I can't remember what Gene's last name, but he had the dark hair. But yeah, he went on to play with Ozzy, in the '90s. But yeah, the interview this band Seduce from Detroit, and they had just moved to LA. They had just got signed to IRS Records, and I guess that's kind of how they got tied in with the movie and the soundtrack, because IRS and Miles Copeland had been like the executive producers. And but yeah, they were a band that kind of looked a little glammy, but they were a little bit heavier. And then I know we're going to get together and talk sometime soon about some of these bands that looked like hair bands or glam bands, but they were really a little more on the heavier side. And Seduce was one of them. I mean, they were definitely a heavier band, but they had that kind of glammy look. I did see where they still play a show every now and then, but they broke up a few years after that. But their drummer plays in Negative Approach, the hardcore band.
Okay.
He went on to do that. But you had London, the band London, which was legendary band from LA, because they were the birthing point of so many rock stars. The guys from Guns N' Roses and I think they said
Nikki Sixx
Nikki Sixx was in it. Blackie Lawless was in it at one point. But they just one of those bands that they had been around a long time, but never had any success, never got a record deal until Nader the Priest came in and he took over the band, and he kind of, was the front man. And it's he's just talking a bunch of smack in the movie and stuff. He's definitely one of the best characters that they interview. And it's just funny how big they talk, like they're these big rock stars, and it shows them in their little RV hitting the road. It's like some 1975 RV or something. And he's telling the stories about getting in fights with cops and stuff. But did a little research in on them and found out, after that he ended up he said he still did London shows every now and then. They changed the name of the band actually to The Priest. I don't know if you remember, they had an album that was it came out in Europe as London, but it came out as The Priest over here, and they were on Noise Records. And that was a really, really good album, if I remember right. It was like, I don't know, like 1990 or so. And but supposedly he worked on like I think he went on to be like a roadie or something with the Stones at one point, and then he opened up his own hair salon for a while. And I was following them on Facebook for a while, but he's kind of disappeared over the last few years. And one of the other bands I wanted to mention that was in it was Odin, and they were pretty iconic in that movie, because they were playing Bill Gazzari's, and Gazzari's was the big club in LA besides the Whiskey and the Roxy, but Gazzari's was the big deal, and that's where Van Halen started. And Odin was playing there, and Bill Gazzari is such a character. He's like this, Goodfellas type guy.
Yeah,
And he's
he's
talking
like a
about
Hugh
how
Hefner of the Sunset Strip.
he is.
He's got two girls around his arms in the movie
He
the
says,
whole
I liked
time.
18-year-old girls when I was 18, and I like them even more when I'm 66 or whatever. And but yeah, he's talking up Odin about how big they're gonna be. And they interview them, and the singers all like, "Oh, we're gonna be huge," and all this stuff, and nothing really ever happened. I know um the guitarist went on to be in Armored Saint, and his brothers played in numerous bands. I think his brother's the drummer's actually in LA Guns now. But I heard that Randy O, who was going to be the definite bigger than David Lee Roth, I heard he became a truck driver on movie sets. He's like a teamster,
Wow.
So, then there's all the other characters in there, the people they interview from all these bands and stuff. And you see
Yeah.
a few people you recognize in there, like Rick Fox from Steeler, and the girls from Vixen are in there.
Hmm.
The girls
Ricky
from
Rackman is in
Ricky
there with the
Rackman,
Cat
the girls
House.
from
Yeah.
Leather Angel. But yeah, and it's all these people. Yeah, I'm gonna be a rock star, and I'm definitely gonna make it. And I always wanted to know whatever happened to the wet cherry guy, the one that was just he was so cocky.
Yeah.
And he's just talking about, yeah, if you just come see us, you'll see why we're so great.
Yeah.
Someone, when I made that post on Facebook, somebody sent a link that he was doing. It was something about like 10 years ago. He was playing a show, and he'd gone like the Marilyn Manson industrial route and stuff, whatever the band it was he was in. But there was one guy that stands out that was in the movie. His name was Gabe Reed, and he
Okay.
was the guy that had the half blonde, half
Yeah.
black
Yeah.
hair. Well, he became a concert promoter and
Oh,
actually
wow.
worked with promoting like WWE gigs and doing stuff in the concert industry. And he ended up ripping off a bunch of people, fraudulent ways of getting money from people and investors. And he ended up going to jail. He got sentenced in 2018 to 52 months in jail, but
Wow.
he got out in 2022, I guess on good behavior or something. But that was, that's what
Wow.
happened to that guy. But it'd be really neat to see what, so many of these other people are doing now. I mean, we know, Ricky Rackman went on to be the
Yeah.
Headbangers Ball host, and he's had a different career all through the years and stuff. But and then there's a bunch of people that when I was watching it the other night with Linda, I was like telling her who was still alive. Like these people
Yeah.
here, these guys are gone. I know like Lizzie Gray from London has passed away. Bill Gazzari, of course.
Hmm.
Ton Master, she was like a was the KNAC
Yeah.
famous DJ. And but yeah, it's a really cool movie to really go back in time and see what it was, how big it was. And I know you said on that post that you had went out to
Yeah.
LA
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
10 years after it. What was your experience?
Yeah, well, with the movie, like you just said, the movie is, if you haven't seen it, you've probably seen some of the scenes from it, even if you don't realize where those scenes are from, like that famous bath scene with Chris Holmes from Wasp, supposedly pouring vodka down his mouth. But the album or the movie is a real time capsule, and it
Exactly.
captures sort of this LA, like you mentioned, Tony. There's nothing about it. It's strictly the LA strip. And I was lucky enough to be there. I was really trying to remember exactly when it was that I was there. It was either late 91 or early 92. Now, Nevermind had gotten released at the end of 91. I believe it was September of 91. That's going to come into my story a little bit later. But when I went, we went down to the Sunset Strip on, it was either a Friday or a Saturday night, and this was still, all this stuff was it full blown. I like to tell people it was a heavy metal Mardi Gras. It's a little funny when you think about how this was laid out. It was really only like about a 3 block area, 3 or 4 blocks on the Sunset Strip, where you literally had these clubs were right next to each other. You had the
Mm-hmm.
Rainbow, the Whiskey, Gazzari's, the Cat House, the Viper Room. They were all literally 2 blocks, three
Mm-hmm.
blocks, maybe at the most. So they're all right next to each other. So when we visited, we took a cab down, and it was just limousines lined up and down the street. Everybody looked like they were in a band. And I don't mean like me, I look like I'm in a band. Like, I mean, hair full blown, like they had just stepped off the stage with Poison. Every guy was dressed to the T. Every girl had their hair out. You could barely walk on the street. There were so many people. It was just like you hear people were passing out flyers to get into the clubs, like the Cat. I distinctly remember us trying to get into the Cat House, and there was a huge line, and there was a guy. It was like a $30 cover or something insane, 2-drink minimum, and there was literally a guy walking down the line going, "You're cool. You might be able to get in. You're not going to get in. You're not going to get in." I mean, they were picking like, okay, you can come in. You could, and that was the way every club was. We got into the Rainbow, which the Rainbow doesn't have music. It's just a bar and a restaurant. But there was still a cover charge to get in there and a drink minimum. I just remember this. There was a 1 drink minimum, and it had to be like a $15 or more drink. Like, right. You couldn't just buy like a draft beer and count it as your thing. And you had to pay to get in.
Mm-hmm.
And my memory of that is walking around in there. It was packed, and the Rainbow has all the famous like pictures on the wall. We made our way around to the one side of the bar, and who was there sitting in the far corner at the one-armed bandit? Lemmy,
Of
because he
course.
was known for that was his spot, the
Mm-hmm.
end of the bar. I think if I remember correctly, the bar was kind of like an L shaped, and he was, all the way in the one corner with his. I couldn't get near him to say hi. He was just surrounded by people, but he was just there with his Jack Coke and his cigarette, pulling the one-armed bandit. But another funny story. All right, another funny story from that. It was, I think, a Sunday morning. So I think we went on either a Friday or Saturday night. I woke up Sunday morning, and wherever our hotel was, I don't even remember. And it wasn't near the Sunset Strip. We had to take a cab that took us 10 minutes to get there. So it wasn't like we were staying right on the Sunset Strip. But I thought, I'm going to walk down. There's a convenience store. I'm going to get, a donut and an iced tea or something, right? And this is like 10:30 in the morning on a Sunday, right?
Mm-hmm.
I walk into this convenience store, and the guy behind the counter looked like he had just auditioned for Bon Jovi or something. He had the hair, he had the outfit, he had the boots, his makeup on and everything. And this is 10:30 in the morning on a Sunday. But that was LA at that time, because for people who, I mean, most people know this, but at that time, it was really the epicenter of this. And everybody from around the world, if you wanted to get signed as a metal band playing that type of music, you had to be on the Sunset Strip. And so you had like that guy in that convenience store. He was there hoping that somebody was going to walk in and see him at 10:30 in the morning on a Sunday buying their coffee. Some record exec, hey, you look great. I'm going to sign you up. I mean, it was just, everyone was waiting for their big moment. Everybody in that whole vicinity there was trying to become famous. And the movie really, really captures that. I mean, you mentioned already, you get interviews with Paul Stanley and Alice Cooper and the guys in Aerosmith. And those are cool. Ozzy's in there too. Ozzy has a famous scene in his kitchen where he's like making breakfast and making a mess of the whole thing, eggs flying all over. And supposedly a lot of that was, set up. But for me, what's really interesting is these unknown people who are trying to make it. They're there with stars in their eyes. They're convinced. It's kind of a famous scene where it's like, well, what are you going to do if this doesn't work out? And pretty much all of them are like, it is going to work out. I am going to be famous, And of course, now you look back on it, and it also sort of, what I find interesting is it also shows some of the shallowness, and there's a lot of like talking about girls and very like they're objects. We use them for money, we use them for food,
Grocery. Yeah.
right? And I can't help, every time I watch that now. So when I was there in late 91, early 92, whenever it was, there was a free music magazine. I believe it was called BAM.
Mm-hmm.
and I think, and uh, it had on the cover Nirvana. Are they the next big band? And like Nevermind had just been released. And I remember that was the first time that I ever, because I wasn't hip to Nirvana before Nevermind. So that was the first time that I had heard of Nirvana. And I can't help when I'm watching that movie here, 87, 88, they don't realize that there's a storm a brewing in Seattle that's about
Totally.
ready to, a tornado that's about ready to come by and totally obliterate that Sunset Strip. So I was back there again in, I think, like 2000, 99, 2000. Now, remember the first time I was there in 91, 92, we had to take a cab. There was nowhere to park on the Sunset Strip. It was all limos. When I came back in like 2000, 2001, we went down on a Saturday night to the Sunset Strip. We parked right outside the Rainbow. We parked our car right outside the Rainbow. There was nobody there. It was completely dead. The Cat House was closed at that point. Gazzari's was closed at that point. I think the Viper Room was still. I remember the Viper Room was on the opposite side of the road from the whiskey was still there. We walked right into the Rainbow. There was nobody there. I mean, it was just such a stark night and day difference. 92, you could barely walk on the streets. 2002, it was a tumbleweeds going down. It was a
Yeah.
complete ghost town. So it's a great, great movie for that kind of like, again, a time capsule type of thing, and sort of the naivety of the characters there, where they're living this hedonistic lifestyle and they're in the middle of all this. And to them, it's like, this is going to last forever. We own the world. This is it. And it's sort of like the fall of Rome or something. They don't realize what's right around the corner from them. And a lot of it's silly. A lot of the people look ridiculous with their hair. The girls say a lot of both the guys and the girls say a lot of
Miss
crazy
Gazzari
things.
dancer, remember her?
Yeah, right,
It,
exactly. Or it just
totally like,
ridiculous.
yeah.
Every time they interview Paul Stanley, he's laying in a bed and the camera's like above him, and there's three girls like just hanging, all over him. I mean, it's so ridiculous. But at that time in 88, 89, that's kind of what it was. And you sort of realize in some respects too how this stuff just it couldn't last forever. And
Yeah.
it was just, if you didn't know any better and you saw this, you might think this is a mockumentary like
Mm-hmm.
Spinal Tap. Seriously, that's the
Yeah.
way.
You're right.
If you
You're
didn't
right.
know any better, you would think that this was a mockumentary, because it's some of these characters, some of these people are so over the top. They're like caricatures of
Totally.
the era.
Yeah.
So did
It,
it come out in the movie theaters? I was trying to remember where I saw this, or did it just go directly to VHS?
well, it did come out. It did premiere in theaters, and but I don't remember seeing it because I live in North Carolina, so I doubt very seriously I would see it anywhere in North Carolina. But I bought the soundtrack before I even saw the movie. I saw the soundtrack in the store one day, and it had a couple of cool tracks. I said, yeah, I'll pick this up, and I didn't see the movie until my local video rental place
Yeah.
actually had. I rented it, and but yeah, I was hooked. I rented it quite a few times and watched it until I actually got my own copy of it. But it's like you said though, man, it was definitely a time capsule, because my first LA trip was in 97, and they used to do this big music conference they're called Foundations Forum that
Oh
they
yeah,
did for
yeah.
years and years. And the year that I went was the very last year they did it, because things had pretty much died down, and LA
Hmm.
wasn't the mecca for the music business at that period. But they had this thing, and they had all these bands showcasing at the various clubs, at the Whiskey and over at Viper Room and the different clubs, the Roxy. And we saw, but it was all new metal. That's what was popular.
Yeah.
1997, grunge had already come and gone, so it
Yeah.
was all new metal. And so you had these bands, and new metal bands, a lot of them had image. They started getting into the gothy look, and also we
Yeah.
started seeing a lot of strange, outfits and costumes during that period as well. But it was really cool, and um, it was happening because this convention was going on. So
Hmm.
I'm sure the week after it was probably a ghost town, like you said again. But it was great for me because with all of it going on, you know, the guy, I always mess up how to pronounce his name, Bob Nalbanian, that
Yeah,
passed
I
away.
was going to mention him. Yeah, Bob Nalbandian, who just recently passed away. He's a guy that's put out a lot of great documentaries
Hmm.
on that scene. I forget what he
The
titles.
LA metal scene
Yeah,
explodes,
those are
and
fantastic with some
yeah.
great interviews. And
So
Bob is a guy who has a podcast that this was before streaming. This was
mhm,
one of the first podcasts I ever heard. When I didn't even know what a podcast was, it was Bob Nalbandian's podcast. Sadly, Bob had passed away not that long ago, but he used to interview Nadir DePriest a lot. He used to come
mhm,
on his show a lot, and Bob knew everybody from that scene, and he has all kinds of great stories about, like, he knew Lars Ulrich when Lars first came over to the US, and so he was very in that scene, and his
yeah.
documentaries are really good because he interviews in this one, in the metal years, you don't really get any of the heavy hitters that came out of that LA. You get Poison. They're probably the
Mhm,
biggest heavy hitter. And, Aerosmith, Ozzy, they're not from that LA strip. So you don't get
yes.
Rat, you don't get Quiet Riot, you don't get Dawkins, you don't get any Motley Crue guys. But Bob Nalbandian's documentary, he interviews like the people from the big bands all the way down to the people that never got signed and stuff like
Mhm,
that. So you get, and it's done in more of a respectful way. It's not like at this point, when Bob did his documentary, it was probably only like 5, 7 years ago that those
mhm.
those movies came out. So this is all these guys now reflecting back on the scene and everything. But yeah, I'm glad you mentioned his name because I wanted to
Most
mention it as
most of
well.
those are all streaming on like Tubi and things as well. You can watch them. But I met Bob for the first time. I
Oh,
had no
wow.
idea who he was or anything. We're hanging out one night. We were like I think we were at the Whiskey or something, or maybe no, we were at the Rainbow. And I met Lemmy there, just like you said. He was over in the corner. Got to meet him, and have a conversation with him where I couldn't understand what he was saying, but he was telling me something about he had just done a movie he was saying called Tromeo and Juliet, and I'm just like, okay. And then I remember like some years later I found the movie at a store. It was a trauma film actually. But anyhow, Bob gave us a ride to what used to be Perkins Place. It was called the Palace, I think, and
Hmm.
they had the only old school show that weekend. It was Quiet Riot, the Metal Health lineup, first time performing together since they
Hmm.
had been broken up. Raven and a band called Slide that had two members of Loudness. So we're
Wow.
like going to the old school metal show where all this new metal stuff is all going on around us. But it was a ton of people there. And we ran into like tons of celebrities. Gene Simmons was even hanging out at one of the places we went.
Wow.
And so it was so cool. But it's like you said, man, a couple weeks later, it was probably back to ghost town almost, because I didn't go back again until 2008. And it's kind of like you said, we had a rental car and we parked right down the street from the Rainbow and went to the Rainbow and had dinner and hung out and met some friends that we had that lived out there. And it was very low key. I think the one night we were there, Wasp was playing over what used to be Gazzari's. It was called
Hmm.
Key Club, I think was what it was called
Yeah.
then.
Was Gazzari still there when you were there in 97?
No, Gazzari's was called Billboard Live, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. And what about the Cat House? Was that closed by then too, also?
I didn't go to the cat house.
I
It
think
may have
that had
already been.
closed
It had
not
already
too
been.
long
Yeah.
after. I think that whole new metal stuff, like Coal Chamber, I think they're from LA. I think that
Mhm.
was like the last time the Sunset Strip had any kind of relevance to, like, modern music, in the sense that there was some new bands
Yeah.
playing, if you want to call it metal, whatever,
Speaking,
metal like adjacent type of music, and kind of making a scene there. But I think that was really the last gasp. I mean, bands still
I,
play. I mean, the Whiskey is still there and bands still play there, but it's more of one of these places. Like when we were there in 2001 or so, we went to the Whiskey just to go, and it was, I don't know who the bands were. There was like 5 or 6 bands on the bill. I'm sure it was a situation, one of these like pay to play just so they could say they played at the whiskey. They weren't, because I think that that's what the whiskey is sort of turned into now. They have the occasional, known band that will play there, but then they also just on a Tuesday night, if you if you buy enough tickets from them, they'll let you play there.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't have any of the clout or anything that it I guess it still does. The whiskey is probably the last place out of all
It
those.
is.
I,
It's
I
pretty
don't know if
much
the
it.
Roxy is the Roxy still
I
there. Do
think
you
the
know?
Roxy was supposed to be closing soon, I believe. I'm not sure.
Yeah. The Starwood, that was the place where quiet. The Starwood, from what I understand, was not on the Sunset Strip, or not really near the Sunset Strip. So bands tended to have the place that they play. Like Motley Crue was at the Whiskey. That was their place. They played there all the time. Van Halen played Gazzarri's all the time. And Quiet Riot, when Randy Rhoads was in the band, the Starwood was their place. But yeah, it's a
It would have been
fantastic movie. So
it would have been neat to see if she had kind of jumped over to the Bay Area and seen what was going over there, because the whole thrash movement was
yeah.
building over there at that period. Because asked Faster Pussycat guys even saying in the movie, they said we played San Francisco and they threw stuff at us,
Yeah.
because it's like, yeah, so
Yeah.
because they were a glam band.
Yeah.
But yeah, but it definitely is a good film to check out if you haven't seen it. Like I said, you can find it on Tubi or some streaming network. I'm sure you can actually
YouTube.
buy it. They put a DVD Blu-ray set out of all three of the Decline of the Western
Mhm.
Civilization movies in a box set. And I looked up the other night. I think it wasn't very expensive, like $35 or something.
Oh
It's
wow. Is there any
not much.
bonus stuff on it?
I'm not sure. I know they did this thing one time where they had some of the people that were in the movies that in the movie like on a panel discussion, but I don't know if they filmed that for the movie, like for bonus
Oh,
footage or not. I know that
yeah.
happened. I think that happened during the 20th anniversary of it, maybe. But I remember seeing
Yeah.
some footage of like Ricky Rackman and some people sitting on a panel
Yeah.
discussing.
Yeah, it would be awesome if there was some, if they had some leftover stuff. Unfortunately, usually back in that era, the way things work, they would film a whole bunch of stuff, cut it together on a master, and then they usually just discarded the old cut it, the stuff that landed up on the floor, because they're
Yeah.
dealing with the old film tape. It's different now with people recording in digital. So that's why, unfortunately, a lot of stuff gets lost in time. But
Mhm.
all right, so yeah, if you haven't seen this, really check it out. Even if you're not a fan of the whole LA glam, mid to late '80s scene, it's. I mean, there are live clips in it, and we did talk about that a little bit. But it's really, this is all about the interviews and the characters and the people in it. So
Mhm.
even if you're not a fan of that stuff, I highly recommend you check it out. If you have seen the movie, let us know what you guys think of it. Let us know what your memories are of it the first time you saw it. How is it today? Looking back on it today, let us know in the comments down below. And I'd like to thank Tony again for joining me here at the Lair. I'm certain he is going to be back. So
Cool.
thanks, Tony, and everybody out there. Till we see you again. Make sure you stay heavy, stay metal.